Alright, this video is going to go over some examples using configuring firewall D. We will be using the firewall-cmd command, which I will just say firewall command, to look at what we want to do. And the first thing we want to do is know what we are actually configured to use within firewall D and what is currently being allowed. So we're going to run this command, firewall command, get active zones. That's -- get active zones to tell us which zones are currently being used. And we see that we're currently using the public zone. So then we want to see what the public zone is allowing with the firewall command, -- zone equal public, and then list all will tell us what is allowed and the other parameters of the public zone. So if we look at this, we're currently letting SSH in and the DHCP v6 client in, and then we're hitting the default target, which the default target is to pretty much allow what's allowed in and block everything else. So for this example, we are going to allow SSH in from a couple of different sources. We're going to remove unnecessary stuff from the public zone, and we're also going to set up logging because we want to log the SSH connections. So firewall D is a zone-based firewall, and it by default has several zones. So you can look at these zones: blog, DMZ, drop, external, home, internal, public, trusted, and work. You can look at these zones and determine if any of those zones meet your needs. And the way you look at those zones is with the same command I used here. You just specify a different zone name. So we are going to allow SSH from trusted sources. So we might want to look at some of these zones and see if those meet our needs. So I'm going to look at trusted and see what it allows. And if we look at the trusted zone, it has a target of accept, and with that target, it's going to let everything in. So I don't necessarily want to let everything in. I want to just allow SSH. So I'm going to look at another zone, the internal zone, which might be more along the lines of what I want to use. So the internal zone is allowing these four services: DHCP v6, client, MDNS, Samba, and SSH. So that's partially what I want, but it's allowing some extra stuff I don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify this zone so that it just allows SSH. So the way you modify a zone, similar command to what we were using before to look at the zone, except now we are going to tell it to remove a service. So the syntax for that is firewall command, we tell it which zone, and then we want to remove -service equals, and then whichever service you want to remove. I want to do MDNS first because that's the only one I can remember exactly which service it is. So that says success, so I'm going to run the list all command again to verify that was removed. So now we see that the MDNS is gone. So I'm going to remove the other two services at this point. The DHCP v6 client service. And then I'm going to remove the Samba client service. Now I'm going to verify all that was removed. Okay, so now I have a zone that is allowing only SSH in through it, called internal. If we look at the active zones again, we will see that we're using the public zone for interface E0. So with the zone-based firewall, you can redirect traffic through that firewall by adding some more commands in to tell it where you want the traffic to go through based on the source that it's coming from. So in this case, I have a server that I want to be allowed to SSH from. So I'm going to change the config to allow traffic in from that server. So I'm going to do that by setting the source and sending that through the internal zone. So the way I do that, I do firewall command. I tell it it's the internal zone, and then I add source equal, and I'm going to put the IP address of my internal system that I want to be able to connect from. So I add source 192.168.240.103. So that was what I needed to do. To verify that change, I can look at two things. I can look at the firewall command, zone list all, zone equals internal list all, and I see that my source is now there. And I can also look at get active zones and see that now I have an internal zone that's active for those sources. So that allowed me to connect. That will allow me to connect from 192.168.240.103. So at this point, I have allowed SSH from one of my acceptable sources. I'm not going to do the other one just yet. But what I need to do is I need to modify that public zone at this point, because the public zone is what everything else that's not redirected through the internal zone is going to get, and it's still allowing SSH. So I'm going to remove these services from the public zone, and the command for that is similar to what we did to remove a service, to add a service. Sorry, the same command we did to remove services. We just need to change the zone name. So this is the public zone. Public. And we're going to remove DHCP v6 client, and we're going to remove SSH. So at this point, if we look at it, we are not allowing anything in from the outside based on the public zone, and we are allowing SSH. I don't have a zone called SSH. The zone's called public. We are allowing SSH from internal zones, what I'm trying to look at. Internal. So we're allowing SSH from my other particular servers. So since I have changed the configuration, I'm going to open a new window to test that change I made. So that was my... I need to connect to the system that I allowed to SSH in. All right, so now I'm going to try to log in with SSH from my system that is allowed to connect. This system has the IP address 240.103. So that lets me in. I have this other window open that I'm connected to the VPN, my VPN, so I should be able to connect to the private IP of this host, but it's going to be coming from a different source, and now I can see that it's being refused. It's being refused because it is not an allowed source. So that is how we can test that. So that's where we're going to go for now with allowing traffic in. The next thing we want to do is log dropped SSH traffic. So what we want to do is run the command that will let us do that. And the way we can do that is by using this thing they call rich rules within firewalld. And the way we add a rich rule is we type add a rich rule. It's pretty cool this rich rule because I'm rich, right? So Rich is adding his rich rules. So no, if your name's Brian, it's not a Brian rule. It's just rich, meaning the language is rich that will let you add the rules. So I'm just going to type this out. I'm going to post in some links to some documentation. You can get more information about the syntax of these things. But basically, this is the syntax for this. We want the rule family equals IPv4. We want this rule to apply to SSH. This is a log rule. When we log it, we want it to go into the log with a particular prefix, meaning it's going to start with these words. We can set the log level, and we're going to set that to notice. If you have like a log server or advanced logging, you can do different things based on the services. And by default, it's going to log every packet, but we don't want to log every packet. We want to set a limit, and we only want to log for each connection 1 per minute. And then we want the action to be dropped for this. So what this rule, I believe, is going to do is going to log any SSH packet and then drop it with a maximum number of 1 log entry per minute. In fact, I'm going to change that to 5 per minute just to help us with our testing. So I have something bad. Service equal, if I mess that up, it's supposed to service, and then it's supposed to be name equal. So there we go. So now if I look at I didn't specify a zone on that. So if you don't specify a zone, it seems like the action is to add it to the default zone, which our default zone is public. So there we do the firewall command zone equals public list all, and now I have like my log entry showing up. So that gets logged into var log messages. So if we run the tail command with a -f, that tells us that we want to look at the bottom of we want to look at the last several lines of the file, and we want that to be updated we want to see the updates. The -f shows us updates. So now I'm going to go back and try to connect again, and cross your fingers. This time it's going to create a log entry. So if we look now, we see we're getting our log entry. We set the limit to 5 per minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 entries, and now it's not logging anymore. So that did what that was supposed to do. Another thing we look at over here, this is a little minor difference in the behavior. Before, the SSH connection failed really quickly, and now it's timing out. And when we told it to drop the connection, what happened was now it's dropping it silently instead of rejecting it. Before we put that drop in there, it was rejecting the connection, so our client knew immediately that it wasn't going to work. Now it is silently dropping it, so our client doesn't know what's going on. So that took care of the rules we needed to add almost. We also want to allow connections from this VPN subnet. So now I'm going to go change the configuration to add the VPN subnet as an acceptable source. And the way I'm going to do that is the same way I added the rule to let CNT serve connect. Instead of putting an IP address on this command, it's firewall-command zone internal add source. The VPN subnet is 255.0/24. So I'm going to add that source, and then I'm going to try to connect again. And hopefully it's going to work this time. Yeah, so now it's working. That is exactly what we needed our firewall to do. So I have made the changes that needed to be made. So now that the changes are made, we need to make these changes permanent. And the way we are going to do that is, I had this marked somewhere. Firewall CMD -- runtime to permanent. So if you don't, any of these changes we just made are in the runtime config. So when we run commands, they show us what is actually running, but it does not update the configuration that gets read when the system comes up or when you restart the firewall. So if I were to restart the firewall right now, all these changes would go away. So I'm going to run this command, and that's going to save it to the permanent config. So now if I if I reload the firewall config, if I reload the firewall config and then look at my active zones, it has the config we saved. So that's an example of what we did on the firewall to implement the specific changes we needed to add at this point to allow SSH in from the specified sources, log the SSH traffic that's getting dropped, and then drop it.